In today's video guys, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 5 favourite houseplants that I own. I've got a lot of houseplants in my house. A good selection of them are here on this table, and I'm just going to be running through which ones are my favourites. So starting from number 5 and then going down to my favourite houseplant that I own. I'll give you the lowdown on why these are my favourite houseplants and why perhaps you should be considering buying them. It's been a tough process to whittle them down to just 5 plants, but I think I've got a good selection for you. So to kick off my list, and coming in at number 5 of my favourite houseplants is this one right here. This is the Philodendron Scandans Brazil. And the thing I really like about this plant is the variegation in the leaves. The Philodendron Scandans naturally just has green leaves, but this is a variegated version where it has the yellow and green stripes on its leaves. I think that's where it gets the name Brazil from. So it's a really interesting plant, one I really enjoy having in my house, really enjoy the leaves. Also with this plant, it's really easy to care for. You just kind of stick it in a bright spot, water it every once in a while, and it kind of does its thing. I've not noticed any brown edges on the leaves, so it doesn't suffer from a lack of humidity, unlike a Califea. This plant is also relatively easy to propagate from. So there's a couple of nice long stems there that I think I'll be looking to propagate and get a couple of extra plants from. This plant is a trailing house plant. That means you can trail it either up or down from its pot. So it wants to grow in a vine-like fashion. So you can either have it trailing down from your pot and have a really bushy plant, or you can have it trailing up a trellis or a moss pole, and that will look really nice as well. I've got a few philodendrons in my house. I think I've got about 5 or 6, and this is my second favourite philodendron that I have. The 4th plant on my list is this guy. This is a Monstera deliciosa, extremely popular plant, blown up in the last few years. So you might not think this choice is very original, but still one of my favourite houseplants. I've had this one about 4 years, I believe, and I think I just bought it from IKEA. Quite a small plant at the time, and it's really grown on to this very large size. Super interesting plant. Obviously, we all know about the fenestration in the leaves. It's one of the things I really like about it. It's a really interesting way that it grows in the wild. It's a vining plant, so it tends to grow up the trees in the jungle, and therefore to allow its lower leaves to get sunlight, it will grow these leaves at the top with slits in, so the sunlight can get to the bottom leaves and it can carry on growing into a really healthy plant. So a really interesting fact about how this plant grows in nature. This is a really easy plant to look after. I've had this in the same pot since I bought it, so I've had it in the same pot for 4 years. Monstera deliciosas tend to like having a tight kind of root area, and I've not seen any issues with this. Maybe the growth has slightly slowed down recently. I think it probably is fairly root bound, so probably will eventually up pot it maybe next year, but at the moment it seems quite happy here. It's not particularly thirsty, doesn't really like wet feet at all, likes to dry out thoroughly in between waterings, so just make sure you're doing that. Keep it in a relatively bright spot. Mine is just away from my bedroom window, so it doesn't get loads of light, but it gets enough to make it happy, so it is fairly tolerant of darker conditions. This plant is relatively easy to propagate from. I think I've propagated 4 plants from this single plant here. I've still got one of them downstairs. I've sold the other 3. You just take a stem where the leaf node is and just pop that into, you can do it in water, perlite or soil, and it will really easily develop roots, and then a few months later you'll start to see some more leaves pushing out. So really easy to propagate. I'll be putting out a video on how to propagate this guy in a future video, so just make sure you subscribe to the channel to be notified when that comes out. The third houseplant on my list of favourite houseplants that I own is the Ficus elastica tineki, which is this guy right here. This is a type of Ficus elastica. Normally you'll see a Ficus elastica robusta in the shops, or a rubber tree plant, and this is a variegated version of that. So it's got these interesting kind of watercolor pattern on the leaves, really interesting, looks really nice within this pink pot that I've got. So this is definitely one of my favorite plants. Again, this plant is really easy to care for, doesn't require much watering, it likes a drier soil. So just put it in a bright spot. It does need a bright spot because otherwise you'll start to lose the variegation in the leaves and it won't be as vibrant. So keep it in a nice bright spot. It can handle a little bit of direct sun, not too much, otherwise you'll start to develop brown spots in the leaves and it might get crispy edges as well. Just keep it on a bright spot near your window and just water relatively infrequently, letting the soil dry out thoroughly in between waterings. The Ficus elastica tineki can be a tricky plant to propagate. I think that's one of the reasons why I like it. I feel like I've achieved something when I have successfully propagated this plant. This is the mother plant I bought, I've had this about a year, and I have propagated. You can see in here where I took the cut on the main stem. I was hoping that it would branch out into two main stems, but it seems to have only developed one main stem, so I might cut it again, propagate off these leaves. I'll do that in a future video, and hopefully this plant will sprout out two main stems and it'll be more of a nicer appearance. The cutting that I took from that plant is sitting here. I actually took a few and I've sold a couple of them, so this is one that I'm keeping. Really developed into a nice strong plant, really happy with that. The penultimate plant on my list is the Skindapsis Enjoy, which is this guy here. I've got it in a nice tall planter at the moment, really nice. So this is another trailing house plant, as you can see from this long stem. So it can either trail down from the pot or you can trail it up a trellis or a moss pole. A word of caution, if you do have it trailing downwards, as with all trailing plants really, the leaves on that stem will tend to grow a little bit smaller. So if you want nice large leaves, then just have it growing upwards and then the plant responds by putting out larger leaves. Not sure why it does that, but it's a feature of all trailing plants. Again, with this one, easy to care for. Doesn't like to have wet soil, so let the soil dry out in between watering. Keep it in a bright location to keep the variegation in the leaves. That's the main thing I like about this plant. It's the white and green camouflage looking leaves. I really like that. So just keep it in a bright spot to keep that effect. I keep mine on my west facing window, and it does get a little bit of direct sunlight, so it can tolerate that, but not too much. So yeah, it's looking really healthy, really happy plant, and I really like it. So now we come to number one, my favorite houseplant that I own. For those of you that have been watching my channel recently, you'll probably be able to guess which houseplant this is. I've featured it a couple of times on my channel already, and it is this guy. This guy is the Philodendron birkin. So philodendrons are green by nature, and this has had white pinstripes added to the leaves. So I think this is a man-made creation. Nature hasn't come up with this. So this is a quite temperamental plant. You just want to make sure you keep it in a bright location within your house to make sure that you keep the pinstripe variegation. If you have it in a darker spot, then the plant will tend to revert back to green leaves only. I've got a care video for this plant. I'll put a link up to it there. You can check out in detail how to care for and look after this plant. But this is definitely one of my favourite houseplants. I could kind of look at the leaves all day long and not get bored. It's really interesting to me. So that's number one on my list. So there you have it, guys, my 5 favourite houseplants that I own. If you disagreed with any of my selection, then please leave it in the comments. Also, please leave your favourite houseplants in the comment section and I'll have a look into those. If you like the video, then please leave a like on it, and I will see you in the next one.